We have with us the Counselors of Real Estate Consulting Corps. And as most of you know, I'm Aubrey Pruis with the Association of Realtors for Paradise. And we have enlisted their help with the efforts to recover our town after the devastating wildfire in 2018. So for the kickoff of their findings, I'll turn it over to Steve Norris, the team lead for the CRE team.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here on behalf of both the Paradise team of the Consulting Corps of the Counselors of Real Estate and the organization at large. We're really honored to be a part of the process of the ongoing rebuilding of Paradise. We'd like to acknowledge, as we begin here, first of all, the generous funding of the CRE Foundation in making this work possible, as well as the support of the National Association of Realtors financially and the California Association of Realtors for additional funding in this effort. I should remind everybody that our conversation today will be recorded for future use and education. So I should start by just saying to you all that this has been really a journey for all of us that none of us anticipated in terms of what we've learned, the advice we can offer, perhaps, and then also really the depth of character of the people of Paradise. I have been impressed time after time with the people we've met on what they've been through and where they have come from. It is truly remarkable. So our job is to come in on a pro bono effort, our team of 6, and to offer advice and thoughtful reflection from our diversified commercial real estate experience as consultants and a variety of other job skills. I'm going to go ahead and begin a little presentation here by sharing this with you guys. So hang on one second. All right. I went looking about a week ago on the internet and found this photograph, which to me is a perfect example of the way the people of Paradise are recovering. And we're, again, this is a privilege for us to be with you today. And so I want to do a few things to sort of introduce the counselors, the Consulting Corps, and then talk about our work and talk about our report. So first of all, who are the counselors? Who are these people who have CRE after their name? The Counselors of Real Estate is an international organization that was founded in 1953. We are affiliated with the National Association of Realtors. We consist of approximately 1,000 thought leaders worldwide. Membership in the organization is extended by invitation only after a very thorough vetting of the professional experience of folks who are applying for invitation. There is a diversity in the counselors that in my more than 40 years of experience in commercial real estate, I have never experienced in an organization. We have a wide variety of disciplines from valuation people to lawyers to academics, economists, planners, all sorts of experience disciplines across commercial real estate. And by and large part, our jobs each day when we go to our offices or our workplaces, our job is to provide objective real estate advice and counsel. And we are problem solvers. And so that's who the counselors are. And then who is the Consulting Corps? The Consulting Corps is a public service initiative, which is really a pro bono volunteer effort of the Counselors of Real Estate. We have been doing this for a long time, since 1997. Our experience is diverse. It is also intercontinental. If you visit our webpage, cre.org, you can see the wide variety of work we've done as a Consulting Corps over the years. Our action plans are diverse. We are unbiased. We do not have an opinion when we come in about what the the way things should work, or we're not pushing any kind of agenda. We come in as experienced neutrals, really, and offer our independent thought and advice. And really, our job is advisory only. We do not do the action steps that we recommend, because that's in the hands of the people who live in the local community. So any of the advice we're giving today is now being given to the good people of Paradise. We have seen them make so much progress so far, and we're excited to help maybe provide additional catalysts to this effort going forward. So now you've learned about the CREs, you've learned about the consulting core. I'd like you to meet our team. Our team here is sharing the screen with me. I think you can see them. And I'll briefly begin by just introducing myself. I have an office in Pasadena, California. I'm a lifelong resident of California. I am a valuation person. We do a lot of appraisal and consulting on complex matters. Military base closures was a big thing we did in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The last several years, we've been working on major sporting venues. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are a client of our firm. We also are involved in large conservation donations of land throughout California. And over my 40 years of experience, I have to tell you that I've never really experienced anything like the sort of the encouragement and enthusiasm and just persistence of the people of Paradise. So for me, it's been a real blessing and a terrific opportunity to meet people in town and to work with this team. And then we'll just go from left to right and let people introduce themselves. Next up is Bruce Wood.
Good morning. Bruce Wood. I'm a developer. I've been working in commercial real estate since 1989. My home is in the Portland as well as the Seattle areas, but my projects are throughout the Western U.S. And I focus mainly on working with jurisdictions and other nonprofits on housing efforts here in the fire impacted counties in Oregon.
All right, Keenan.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Keenan Hughes. My background is in city and regional planning. I'm a partner in a planning and land use consulting firm based in the New York City area in Hoboken, New Jersey. So I advise governmental and private clients on planning and zoning matters throughout the Northeast. And I just want to essentially echo what you heard from Steve, which was that this has been a very rewarding experience. I think I've been personally very inspired by all the stories that we heard from folks in the Paradise community. And also, I think I've also been very energized by this work because it's been amazing to see, particularly all those involved with problem solving in terms of creating housing opportunities in Paradise has been just terrific to experience sort of secondhand and sort of participate in the story of this community's rebuilding over time. So thank you.
Why don't I jump in and go next? I'm Eileen Marin. I'm realizing I'm the very short person on the team looking at the picture. I am managing director for Eigen 10 Advisors. We're a boutique consulting firm here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most of what we do is investment strategy and economic and market research for real estate investors, developers, and owner-operators. I was a new homeowner when the Oakland Hills fire happened here and was very close to being burned out myself, so I know how that feels. Fortunately for me, the wind shifted suddenly and my immediate block was saved, but not many others, as you know. And I saw the city of Oakland really bring a lot of resources to bear and rebuild, and they did it quickly, but it still took years. And I was struck when we were in Paradise in July. It reminded me very much of the small town my mom had grown up in. So easy to walk up to people and chat with them and really engage and see what their situation was and what they had been going through. And it struck me that, you know, you're a small rural area and the resources that you can bring to bear are not at all what they are in a major city like Oakland. And so we very much focused, I think, on really trying to understand what the opportunities were so that you can maximize your ability to rebuild and really sustain the momentum that you had in the first couple of years after the fire.
Bob. Oh, you're on mute. There we go. I told you that would happen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Bob Green. I'm the chief appraiser for the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Washington. We have about 5 million acres that we manage for the state of Washington. We are really land managers and kind of a real estate investment portfolio. 2.5 million acres of that are timber. And wildfire prevention and wildfire addressing is kind of in our DNA. During the summer, during wildfire season, my floor is only about 25% occupied because we're sending people across the country, but mostly in Washington and Oregon, also in Northern California. So we feel acutely what you're dealing with. I have to say, working with the people of Paradise and listening to your story and being inspired by what you do and how you do it has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, as well as working with my colleagues on this project.
Thank you, Bob.
Greg.
I'm Greg Peterson. I'm the lawyer on the team. I am the kind of lawyer that other lawyers refer to as a dirt lawyer, meaning I focus on all the aspects of real estate development, as well as purchases, sales, leasing, permitting, environmental impact review, environmental remediation in brownfields where it's needed. I'm a graduate of Harvard Law School. I have been practicing for just a little over 35 years at this point, and my experience includes office development, biolab development, multifamily development, including but not limited to sort of, narrowly defined affordable housing, but more broadly, multifamily housing in a variety of settings. For me, I practice with a firm called Kasner and Edwards in Boston, Massachusetts, and I've been here for about 40 years. But I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Western Montana in a town of about 25,000 people. And I must say, being in Paradise last July when we came out there and met with so many wonderful people and heard their stories and what they had tried so far, and honestly smelling both the smoke in the air and the scent of the ponderosa pine, it was like being home again. And it felt really good. I have a larger interest in the more general subject of climate change adaptation, because I think what the folks of Paradise have experienced is, as we've seen from recent news events, far from an isolated event. Thanks.
Thank you, team. It was such an honor to serve with these folks, and we have become unavoidably fast friends. So it's been a terrific process. I want to talk to you a little bit about that process. What the heck did these 5 people from all over the country do, and how did that work? We came to town before we showed up. We were reviewing paperwork, studies that had been done from all sort of corners of the process of rebuilding in Paradise. So we did a lot of homework before we showed up. We were exchanging that prior to our visit in early July. In early June, I went up for a day, visited with Aubrey, got a tour of town, a lay of the land, and a sense of the challenge ahead of us and the challenge that the people of Paradise have been facing daily. We had a team visit in July for several days where we met with a large number of people in the community, elected officials, staff, business people, all sorts of folks. And we actually had a number of just sort of serendipitous meetings with people at Mountain Mike's Pizza Parlor. We met with the mayor and got a chance to chat with folks and understand what their life was like when we were there, I think 3 days before the Dixie Fire ignited. And so every evening as we went to dinner, there were pyrocumulus clouds in the mountains right behind Paradise, which were a rather ominous reminder of the serious nature of what the people there have been through and what the challenges that they continue to have. Following our meeting, we held over 20 team meetings via Zoom. And so I don't know if there's an award for that, but we did that all. And then there was a long process of researching, discussing, putting together recommendations and putting together then our report. When we were in town, we went on a grand tour that Aubrey was gracious enough to provide us, sort of taking us to key points in town. This is the Adventist hospital site, which was one of the things we looked at. And I guess I should give a particular thanks to Aubrey and the Board of Realtors and for their wonderful cooperation with us. Mayor Crowder took an evening out of his busy schedule to just sit with us and kind of tell us what it's been like. And that was an evening I will not soon forget. Kevin Phillips, also the town manager, was terrifically helpful in our efforts. And so we're very thankful for their input. So this is the Consulting Core report. And as soon at some point in the chat, the good folks or the counselors in Chicago will be providing a link to the report. It is on our website. And I'll slow down for a second here and say that you are all being able to look at a high altitude view of what we did in our brief presentation this morning. We are not going to drone on about details. We're going to give you the overview of what we've learned, and we are going to sort of lead you through that. Read the report, download the report, use it as a tool for new ideas that you may have that come out of just reading this, and to focus on hopefully some of our recommendations. Our time together is only an introduction, and we are not naive enough to think that we have the magic elixir for instant change in Paradise. We know that it's a daily effort, a weekly effort, a monthly effort, and we support you in that. We will remain available, answer questions. And the counselors is a large organization. And I think we've only begun to tap the type of experience that some of our folks have. And so there may be more answers in the future that we don't know about, but through the relationships we've forged with Aubrey, the Board of Realtors, and the city, we think that there can be some positive steps forward in the future. So read the report. I want to give you sort of a quick overview of how we approach this project. And then I'm going to touch briefly on the main challenges we perceive that the city and the larger community faces, and also really in some ways the Western US, because this is not going to be the last wildfire in California. I think we all know that. So our approach, many of the plans that are proposed for Paradise have a relatively longer time frame, 5 to 10 years. These are undergrounding of utilities, undergrounding of internet, some new internet backbone issues in town, which are lovely ideas. The sewer system that's proposed, these have 5 to 10 year timelines. And towards the close of our efforts in town, one of the things that our team discussed together is we need to try to bring suggestions that can be facilitated and results received within a shorter time frame. The folks in town deserve that. They deserve some short-term goals to look at that really will help things move along more expeditiously. So our focus then is going to be on a 3 to 5 year time horizon, things that can happen in the relatively near future that can really benefit the citizens of Paradise. Our goal is to build a resilient and equitable community and really to provide additional hope for the people of Paradise who've been doing an amazing job of providing their own hope every day when they get out of bed. We're honored by that. We have a number of recommendations, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, but this is sort of an overarching quick look. We want to have a nimble approach. We want to make things streamlined, and we really want to be part of helping with advice for the growth of Paradise for both residential and commercial areas. So what were our challenges? What were the things that stood out to us as a result of all these conversations and meetings and numerous conference calls that occurred that didn't make it in my bullet points with a number of folks in the community? The challenges we perceived as most acute and needing attention were as follows. There's a great deal of uncertainty related to insurance payouts and infrastructure timelines into the future. So that's one of the big issues. Everybody wants to rebuild. One of the biggest obstacles they're confronted with at the beginning is, wow, look at the potential insurance bill. Last night, a Wall Street Journal article talked about this issue, and it's still on the front burner in California. So it's very important. Insurance challenges. The older, inexpensive housing supply is now largely gone. How do you rebuild that in a thoughtful way? Individual septic system standards for single-family homes and mobile home parks and multifamily are becoming a significant limitation to the ability to redevelop. And so that's something that we found as a repeating issue. There is a certain level of complexity and resistance in terms of regulatory things at City Hall. We're going to talk more about that in some of our action steps. There is also a perceived lack of community awareness of assistance efforts. Now, by the way, these last two bullets are nobody's fault. They just exist. And this is a normal thing. This happens after natural disasters everywhere. We did a lot of reading of other natural disasters, and these last two come up all the time. So how do we take action steps to deal with those? So here we are. We're at the point of our action plans, and I'm going to ask our committee to jump in here, our team to jump in, because they really sort of attacked some of these issues from different perspectives and based on their prior experience. So we brought the smartest kids in the room to the front for certain issues. The first one is the retention of a deal maker. This is someone who can help from sort of a leadership perspective to facilitate progress. And for that, I'm going to ask Bruce Wood to talk a little bit. Bruce is doing this in Oregon. Bruce.
Thank you, Steve. And I'll just jump into it. In Oregon, last fall, and there was a significant series of wildfires over the Labor Day weekend, which heavily impacted 4 rural counties here in the state of Oregon. We lost several thousand homes, and in some communities, very similar situation to what you have in Paradise. And what happens when you try to rebuild, and FEMA comes in right away. They meet with people. A lot of people can't fit into the FEMA or qualify for FEMA assistance, especially in an agricultural-based community. So there's just a lot of effort from the state to get people housed, and they often end up in hotels initially, and then the state tries to place them or give assistance in many areas to get people in their communities and get them into housing. The challenge is that we found in Oregon is our government processes and the way that we go about doing things on the public side and getting things done quickly in a commercial real estate sense, those two are very challenging. It's just the nature of the processes and how the public spends its money and contracts for things. And often it just takes a lot of time. And again, as Steve mentioned, it's nobody's fault. It is what it is. And so in the state, they recognized that. And there were all these ideas and things being floated to move quickly. And everything was just coming to a standstill because they could not get through that bottleneck of just processes and committees and different buckets of state efforts, that just don't really work well together. And so the state hired myself and another developer to really work as kind of a gatekeeper with all these efforts. And we serve as consultants to state agencies. We serve as facilitators to local communities. We're not decision makers. We're just really experts that when ideas and things are floated, we can quickly determine whether they're viable or not. We can determine and consult with the local jurisdictions and how to get those things done quickly. And then in some cases, we actually conduct initial due diligence on certain ideas. And it has incredibly accelerated. This effort has really broken through a lot of things that just take a long time to get done. And we're just able to get there quicker. And again, it's worked very well. We currently have several hundred homes, interim housing in many different forms in these counties that are under construction now. We have helping communities buy burned out trailer parks and turning them into housing co-ops. We have affordable housing projects that are quickly moving forward, even though those take a year and 18 months to build. We were able to quickly facilitate and coordinate the effort from a financing perspective to move those forward. And so our recommendation is that somehow you do a similar thing with Paradise, and that you hire a seasoned, perhaps like a retired developer that knows all the players, that knows the areas, that knows the city well. And essentially that becomes a consultant to your community and the jurisdictions, as well as the private sector. And so when people have ideas, then there's someone on the side of the public that can quickly help the public understand whether those ideas make sense or not, and how you can get them, the good ones, to move forward quickly. Steve,
thank you.
Did I leave anything out?
That's good enough for the process of what we're doing, and a key component of our findings. Okay, wildfire insurance programs and new approaches to parcel inspections. Bob Green from Washington, I'm going to let you chat, and I believe that also Greg Peterson wants to add in as well.
Well, I'll begin. Obviously, once you are in a designated wildfire hazard zone, your vulnerability to insurance increases really gets magnified. And so how do you address that? And I'd like to say that there are really two levels of that. One is the small scale level, and the other is the large scale level, the micro and the macro. I want to start with the inner circle, the local level first. It is known how to make communities more wildfire resilient, not to make them bulletproof, but to make them more resilient. And the report discusses some of those, and there are sources in which those can be found. That also has two levels. There's a community-wide portion of what you do to make a community resilient, and there's a individual property level that addresses the same issues. And so we think that to build on and to create further a program by the town of Paradise to encourage, support, including financially support and enforce those practices, which are partially listed in the report. The outer circle, the macro level, is a little bit more difficult. Paradise is not alone. So Paradise will be in competition with other communities in California for resources and problems and solutions. that may sound daunting, but it also creates a possibility of alliances with other communities that share the same kinds of problems and difficulties. And so I think if the town can reach out to these other communities and create a unified front to essentially lobby government and agencies to address their problems. There's a possibility of creating a large-scale template for fire insurance. Greg Peterson can talk about that in more detail, but in response to 9/11, there was a insurance backup created, funded by the government, essentially enlarged the pool so that there was a possibility that no one carrier could create or could experience a catastrophic loss. That work is more statewide and even national. And one of the last things that I'll just talk about here, and Greg also knows a great deal more about this, is that insurers that use a more granular level of analysis than a macro level of analysis are better equipped to make realistic assessments, risk assessments, and for individual properties. And so investigating those sources will, I think, be a part of what's going on. There was a 2019 report prepared by the Office of the Insurance Commissioner, said that there were some problems in terms of property appeals and having a regulatory appeal procedure that would require legislative fix. It was not specific about those, but I think that needs to be investigated because I don't think that's fully been taken advantage of.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to jump in at this point. Just for the benefit of some of the folks in the audience on this webinar who may not be familiar with insurance markets, clearly having property, casualty, fire insurance is fundamental to maintaining the value of a piece of property and indeed being able to rebuild. If you can't place insurance, affordable insurance on a property, you have real problems because you're going to have problems financing it, right? The lenders are not prepared to take the risk. They're putting money out at a fixed rate of interest. It's not their risk in their view to take on. So how does this work in the insurance market? Well, there are, the individual carriers who write policies, but insurers in turn have reinsurers. So within the market, as you sort of climb the system, risk is laid off from individual carriers to reinsurance companies that are operating fundamentally, not just nationally, but internationally across the entire spectrum of the developed world in North America, in Europe, in Japan, and some of the middle income emerging markets. And it is that reinsurance market that has gotten severely spooked by wildfire risk. And it is the inability of the, themselves pretty large carriers to lay off, meaningful portions of the risk to the reinsurance market that is causing some companies to pull out of the market entirely in places in California and in other situations to increase premiums really pretty dramatically. So the Wall Street Journal article that Steve mentioned earlier that is up live, on the Wall Street Journal website, folks should take a look at that, talks about specifically the decision that has been taken by AIG and Chubb, two of the larger carriers in the business, to basically stop writing homeowners insurance on high value homes in large parts of California. And it's driven by this inability to lay off the risk, or to share the risk through the reinsurance pools. So it's not just an issue for Paradise. It's a much larger issue for California overall. When we were talking with folks, when we were out there and in subsequent conversations, something like a quarter of the population in California lives in places where sooner or later there's going to be a problem actually maintaining affordable homeowners insurance. So it's a very real issue. We know that locally in Paradise after the fire, people quickly saw 400% and 500% increases in their insurance premiums, just to sort of put some brackets around this. And in the case of an affordable housing multifamily development that has been brought back with an awful lot of hard work in Paradise, that project had to go to the London market for manuscripted insurance at a cost more than 15 times what its insurance premium had been before. That's not sustainable, and Paradise is not alone in this. So, as Bob had suggested, there's a company in Oakland called Zesty.ai, which provides very granular, detail about who is managing brush, who is, rebuilding in a kind of way that meets urban, wildland interface, codes, and therefore who ought to qualify for better premiums because, frankly, they're a better risk. That company has been working with farmers, I believe it is. And so the result is that while some carriers have gotten out of the market and had issues with reinsurers, others have been able to manage it through a much more intelligent, much more granular, not just zip code level based risk, which is really much too broad for the purpose. The other sort of insurance backstop that Bob mentioned earlier is really to take the model of what was called the Terrorism, Risk Insurance Act, or TRIA, which was passed by Congress in the wake of 9/11 when the reinsurance market seized up and basically decided that they were going to stop writing property casualty policies, especially in New York, but really in all major urban downtown core areas across the country. And so Congress basically said, we think there are going to be ways to control this risk. And so for limited purposes, and subject to some very sizable caps, the federal government will, with its full faith and credit, backstop the reinsurance market on terrorism risk. There's obviously language that exists for this. It's been adopted. It's been reauthorized by Congress, and so we took that model and provided suggestions to a number of the people we met with, precisely so that the ball it needs to be in your court because it's your town, it's your community, it's your state. But there is a model which not just Washington, but frankly, conversations with folks in Sacramento and alliances built with people in other parts of California, whether it's Malibu or Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara or, the Napa and, Sonoma folks or, the others impacted by the Dixie fire and other fires this last year could come together and see, if there's a way to effectively use the faith and credit of California to work with the reinsurance markets to make insurance, available and affordable. So I'll stop there because that's a lot to absorb. And Steve, back to you.
Well, and it is a crucial issue for all of California and the western part of the U.S. and something that needs to be addressed seriously. Next up, we have housing supply, a massive loss of housing in Paradise. And we're going to let Eileen Marin speak a little bit about this topic.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Housing supply and affordability obviously is a huge, huge issue. And we actually had a lot of different points that we talk about in the report to address both of those things. I just want to cover a couple of them. Just to start out, obviously, Paradise was a very affordable community. You had a housing stock that was predominantly older, that had been built out over time, mostly decades ago, and was just organically, naturally affordable. The median home price in Paradise was less than half the median for the state of California. And 30% of the people that lived there were renters. You had a large number of veterans and seniors. So you've lost your housing stock. And I think everyone knows it's hard to not be aware that new construction of housing specifically, especially in a rural area, is extremely difficult. Hard to get a labor force up the ridge. The materials costs, the labor costs have skyrocketed. And so the cost to rebuild these homes is beyond the reach of most of the folks who did live in Paradise. So the big question is, how can you expand the affordable housing that's built there so that the maximum number of people that want to come back are actually able to do that? And we've spent a lot of time talking about that and trying to figure out different solutions. One of the things, you do have folks that have the means and or the insurance payouts and have been able to just go in and rebuild. So this is focusing on the other folks. And, first of all, most of Paradise has always been single family detached homes. So the idea of expanding the supply and looking at different kinds of housing so that you can bring more people in, hitting the missing middle, the workforce housing that just can't be built right now by the market. There are a lot of existing resources that we feel you can take advantage of to help make that happen. You've got the Housing Authority of Butte County, try to funnel more money to CHIP because they've already rebuilt the one affordable rental complex that they had just finished when the fire came through, and that has now been replicated. Obviously with some of the insurance issues Greg outlined, they've been constrained, but hopefully some of those other issues will be worked out. And also bringing in new resources. One of the things that we spent quite a bit of time on is community land trust. If you set one up that's for housing in the town of Paradise, focusing on affordability, that's something that doesn't exist there. It's enabling legislation of the state of California. It gives the community land trusts or CLTs a lot of flexibility to work with nonprofits, with governments, with the private sector to help make affordable housing happen, permanently affordable housing. And there are a lot of different ways they can operate. They provide property tax abatements, permanently less expensive land costs. There are all kinds of examples. We outline a couple of them in the report. And there are some resources that we point you to help set one up. The whole idea, one that we came up with after meeting with some of the folks at Paradise was to try to have a program that's geared towards bringing construction workers up so that they're living on the ridge and able to stay there. And obviously that creates some of the labor supply that you need to accomplish some of your other goals. So basically the idea would be to, look at things you're already doing, accessory dwelling units. You've lost all of your mobile home parks, and Paradise had a very high percentage of mobile homes in its housing stock. It's one of the reasons that it was an affordable community. There are a lot of ways to go into those. We see those as currently underutilized resources. They have septic capacity and other infrastructure, and they're sitting vacant. So the ability to go in there with some manufactured homes, perhaps, if the community land trust owns the land, it's written down permanently. There is another organization we surfaced that actually specializes in helping people in mobile home communities buy the land under their mobile homes. So there are a lot of different ways to skin the cat, as the saying goes, and help make these things happen. I think, finally, just trying to help people who find the process of the construction of a new home or just getting through the new home purchase process, having resources to help them with that. I know the Rebuild Paradise Foundation has an underwriter position they've just created to encourage and expand upon that. Would be hugely helpful for folks who found the process too intimidating and have kind of given up briefly. And there are a couple of opportunities through existing nonprofits for veterans to rebuild homes through the Homes for Families program. NAR itself has a program called Homes for Heroes, and they help underwrite closing costs and other expenses to buy for teachers, firefighters, and other essential workers, the everyday folks that want to come back to Paradise. So there are a lot of opportunities, and we try to identify those, maximizing the resources you have, expanding into some new resources that you can create, we think, fairly readily. And, just as a final point before I hand back to Steve, the state of California has a huge budget surplus, and they're very, very focused on providing more housing. There's a lot of money that's flowing into that. And, it would be great if Paradise could latch on to some of that, because they're definitely a community in need. And the state has capacity right now, so go for it.
So Eileen's comments are terrific in that they sort of underline my advice earlier: read the report. There's a lot of suggestions and ideas there for consideration. The next 2 points I'm going to ask Keenan Hughes from New Jersey to address in terms of zoning and infrastructure issues.
Thank you, Steve. I'll start by speaking to the zoning issues, and that is a very common problem in a post-disaster recovery environment, which is the land use regulatory framework that's in place really cannot meet the challenges or the scale of rebuilding that's required in such a situation. So you have a zoning ordinance that works just fine in a business as usual situation, but simply doesn't correspond to a situation where you're basically rebuilding an entire community. And in fact, the zoning ordinance can often impede progress on that front. And likewise, you have review processes that, again, may work just fine in a typical scenario. But again, given the scale of this situation and the number of development applications that Paradise is already faced with, they're processes that are too time consuming and too cumbersome to really provide the progress and the stimulation that's needed in terms of creating new housing in particular. So we have a number of ideas set forth in our report that get fairly detailed. Just a couple examples would be, at least as it relates to the ordinance, eliminating the minimum square footage requirement for primary dwellings, and also to perhaps even explore eliminating maximum density limitations throughout the town, knowing that septic capacity really is the greatest control. It's sort of a self-controlling mechanism, if you will, when it comes to density. So there doesn't appear to be a need to layer on top of that an additional control on density. So those are a couple of examples. And I also want to recognize that the town of Paradise has actually already taken a number of steps immediately in the aftermath of this event to provide some more flexibility. They've created some interim provisions in the zoning ordinance to create a more flexible approach to permitting development. We just think that there's more opportunities to sort of further that intent. And maybe perhaps just aside from the detailed recommendations is really just adopting that mindset of constantly questioning whether the existing requirements, the existing processes that you have in place to review development and control land use really make sense in this environment, and to constantly push towards the idea of providing more flexibility and being more nimble, because I think that's possible without impairing or undermining Paradise's long-term planning goals. And I know the town has also done quite a bit in terms of its long-term planning. So then related to that would be this whole issue of septic capacity, which was a constant theme in all of our discussions when it came to folks involved with the rebuilding process. And we do have a number of recommendations in our report, one of which would be taking advantage of some of the larger scale properties that exist in town, which have septic capacity to support more housing. And I know the Adventist site is one example. There's also a number of former mobile home parks that could certainly support higher density housing just based on their existing infrastructure. So that was another very important issue that we examined. And unless anyone else has anything to add on that issue, I think I turn it back over to Steve.
This is Greg. I think just a couple of things to add on the septic front, which is typically in real estate development, there are a couple of fundamental gating issues. And one of them is water supply, and another one is sewage treatment capacity. Fortunately, fortunately, Paradise solved the water supply problem, as we understand it, in no little part thanks to the work of the person who is now the city manager. But there are serious septic capacity challenges there because of the thinness of the soil, numerous locations in which sewage, effluent receiving soils intersect gullies or arroyos where they would daylight, which is a problem. And we understand that the town effectively has, delegated authority and can run septic approvals basically only to the secondary treatment level. But in a number of situations, in order to get the kind of a housing mix you need, the kind of housing density you need, you're likely to need to look to solutions beyond the tie-in to the sewage treatment plant in Chico. That tie-in, which is important, and the environmental impact review and other work for that is ongoing, is going to take a while. And at the end of the day, it's primarily going to serve a relatively limited area of the town along the major corridors. Okay, and so a significant part of the potential residential, building growth out there is going to depend on the ability to put tertiary package treatment plants together to work with folks probably in, the UCal system who are experts in the area to develop ways where the monitoring activity that has to take place for private package treatment plants can be done, or more of it can be done remotely, because the population and the skill set needed to do that, the licensed folks needed to do that, there just aren't enough of them locally to make all of that work out. But at the end of the day, the success of the town and the commercial recovery on the town is going to depend on the number of people who can live in the town. And fundamentally, the gating issue for that is going to be the ability adequately, to treat, sewage effluent coming off of it. And there are models in other states where multiple properties tie in to a common sewage treatment plant. We understand that's not as common in this area, but there are models available from other jurisdictions where homeowners associations and commercial owners can get together and really agree to maintain and fund and have, the kinds of, assurance mechanisms that the private plants are going to be taken care of. One other thing I'd mention, and again, So this is mentioned in the report, but there is occasionally the ability to use industrial revenue bond financing for private package treatment plants. And again, the role of a deal maker, somebody who could help move, all of this forward, would be important. So all of this ties together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Greg. And one final point I'm going to let Keenan address briefly is, if I can get this working here, is the designation of a single point of contact. And Keenan, I'll let you run with that briefly.
Yeah, sure. So this is really related to that discussion about the review and permitting process. And the idea here is that there should be a single point of access, office or person, where an average citizen can be informed and coached throughout the entire process of rebuilding and even refinancing. So we see this person as a facilitator, a coach, someone who would essentially, hold the hand of any citizen coming through who's interested in rebuilding within the community. I know that the staff is already doing that to some extent, but to have a single person sort of designated in that role would seem to be appropriate given the circumstances.
Right. And we know there's been a great deal of effort made in terms of streamlining the rebuilding process. I think there's always more to do. I think that's what we're seeing here. As a part of our listening, we thought that was we thought these 6 bullets were kind of the, high level, high altitude view of the work. And we've come to sort of our conclusion of flying over at that level. We're certainly now willing to take questions as time would permit. We have some contact information here. Samantha DeKoven is on the call with the counselors in Chicago and can facilitate further interaction as we move forward. But we're open for questions. I'm not exactly sure how this process is going to work. Samantha, maybe you can unmute there and pitch in and let us know how questions are going to come in, if there are any.
Questions can be submitted via the Q&A.
Great. Got one here for Aubrey.
And mute myself. I think that we're in we have an opportunity ahead of us to reevaluate how we look at community and how we develop community. And I think that the team's report here, and again, as they've said, and I'll recommend also to download the report and please do read it. There's a lot of great information in there. I think this is a critical opportunity for us to build a community that is like it's been mentioned in this meeting as a model to other communities as well. So I am in full support of their report and their findings.
The next one is, go ahead, Eileen, sorry.
I was actually going to say, while we're waiting for questions, and obviously there is one, so I'll be very quick. One thing we didn't mention, and I just wanted to point out, is commercial development. And it was one of the things we were asked to address, and we discussed it extensively. We focused very much on the residential rebuild because, frankly, retail follows residential. And until you've got your population base there, you won't successfully attract commercial. So we very much focused on the residential piece. But we do make recommendations in the report sort of step by step on how you can bring and encourage commercial to come in, starting with, pop-ups and weekend events and things like that, going into as you build out your broadband, maybe doing a little co-working and just how you can build that over time. But to sort of build off something Aubrey said, one of the points on the commercial side is, again, Paradise grew out over many, many decades and is an older community dating back to the gold rush. And it's an opportunity, I think, to think of how you want the commercial to look and point it in that direction as it does come together. And perhaps, make it more of a compact downtown, make it a little more walkable. I really figure out what Paradise wants their commercial district to look like, and then sort of guide it in that direction as the capacity comes up to actually rebuild the commercial side. But again, we did very much focus on the residential because you have to get people living up on the ridge so that anyone who wants to have a business there can survive as a market rate business. So just.
Right. Okay. So there was a question about the report itself. It will be, there will be a link provided to the report. There it is. Download the team report in the chat. And then that can be found at the CRE website. You can contact Samantha for that as well. And I'm going to let Greg take the question from Kate Anderson.
So sure, Kate, feel free to reach out to me directly. We had been, following up with Chip and with Charles on insurance efforts, because fundamentally, we can provide some background and some suggestions. An awful lot of that is going to be good old-fashioned shoe leather at the local and state level to build connections. So I hope that answers that question. First and foremost, just to circle back, I think getting a deal maker, somebody with deal making expertise involved here, is going to be critical in moving this forward.
Absolutely. That's an absolute, I think, for us. And I'm certain that Bruce would be willing to offer whatever assistance he can in that regard based upon his experience the last year or so. Right, Bruce?
Sure. Yep. Anybody's welcome to reach out and I'll chat with them anytime.
And if anyone isn't following it, Kate just, noted in the Q&A that they've received that the town's received a California resiliency grant to help with the insurance subject. I really do think that there's an opportunity here for Paradise, for a variety of reasons, to actually lead an effort and pull together a statewide coalition.
Right. There was a question about further future connections. We have an anonymous question on that. And one of the things I wanted to comment on is, we're releasing this report today to our client, the Board of Realtors in Paradise. It's also being released and disseminated widely through the counselors of real estate. We will be conducting webinars in the coming weeks and months about this effort. And I think that there is a fairly significant undiscovered potential of expertise within the counselors. And the tradition of our having a consulting corps will very hopefully facilitate that. There may be other suggestions, ideas, initiatives that we don't even know about yet. I feel like we've done some careful study, we're beginning to scratch the surface. Here's where we are today. I'm excited to see where we are a year from now, where Paradise is a year from now. And in particular, in working with other groups, Charles Brooks was the former director of Rebuild Paradise Foundation. He is now working at afterthefire.org. This is going to be a nationwide effort, and perhaps larger than that, to really help facilitate solutions to wildfire disasters. And so we think this is a good beginning. It's certainly not all the answers, but it is an interesting start. And I think we've got some more fun things to report in the future. Don't know what they are yet. Can I ask Eileen to talk about the housing study question?
Yeah, actually, thanks, Steve. I was just looking at that. So I know, because as Steve said, we sort of reviewed a lot of the reports that were done by other groups before we really got launched. And we have not done a survey, obviously, but I believe surveys have been done asking people, would they return, under what circumstances? And I'm speaking from memory, but I think this is pretty correct, that it came down essentially to a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, where a third of the folks have permanently moved elsewhere, are not going to come back. A third are definitely coming back or already back. And then a third said, it kind of depends on what the opportunities would be. So I think, there's a certain amount of squishiness in that. But we also think there's a very good chance that you'll see more people that have been Chico residents coming up the ridge because Chico's become pretty much built out and is getting much more expensive. And so, that's a possible source of demand for the new construction in Paradise as well that we talk about in the report.
And as Eileen said earlier, an important part of rebuilding and repopulating the ridge is going to be having the trades workforce to make that happen, and then to maintain that housing stock over the years, and finding ways to encourage that trades population to come up, perhaps on a short-term basis, perhaps in mobile housing, and then leverage that to not only build houses for people coming up from Chico, but to move in themselves with their families and grow the community. It seems like a natural way to really build the repopulation wave.
I'm going to jump in and just say, the question was, if it's affordable, how many people are going to move back to Paradise? And that's very challenging because there were people that were there before and some want to come back and can't or whatever. But the fact is, you had a town of 28,000 people that was essentially the affordable kind of alternative for many folks for that entire region. And the fact is you have a wonderful community there, and it's a wonderful place to live. So in my opinion, every affordable house that's there is going to get filled. The question is who's it affordable to? So if you can build affordable housing, then people will continue to flock there because you had a 28,000 population before. There's no reason you wouldn't have at least that in the future. The challenge will be can you build that organic, affordable housing you had before? Because that was the majority, or at least half of your population. And that's where the challenge is, because to build something from scratch is just not affordable anymore. So it's going to take creativity, subsidies. It's going to take flexibility from a housing your housing stock, the types of housing, the size of housing. But if you can build it, and you can build it affordably, in my opinion, it will become, again, the community that you had before quickly.
Just underscore a couple of those points that Bruce just made. The cost of housing is driven in large part by the size of the house, particularly given the cost of labor and the cost of supplies, right? So allowing, not having minimum size requirements, as Keenan mentioned earlier, is a way to help, make sure that there's a better mix of, housing types available for a variety of people. You also have a challenge on the demand side here as well. It's now pretty clear that across the country, in fact, across Canada as well, the remote working ability that has, come into play as a result of, the pandemic has driven up housing values in all kinds of, rural and exurban areas. And that's a reality and probably isn't going to go away. You have a much larger catchment area than just Chico.
And once you have broadband, that makes Paradise a more desirable place for people who are going to be doing remote work. So, and we talk about that a little bit in the report. And I actually want to add, the report deliberately by choice, is only about 35 pages long. Because we want to make it accessible. We want to make sure that people really are able to review it. And, if there are follow-on questions, as Steve said, obviously we're happy to field those. But we wanted to make it accessible and something that you could actually use as a handbook and get through. So just a quick point to make there.
Regarding Pauline's reframing question, I guess my answer would be all of the above. Steve?
That's exactly what I was going to say, that you guys could respond to that follow-up.
I have one thing to add to that, just as a point of reference for developers or just progress forward is, for one example, we have a young, enthusiastic and very energetic agent, and he talked with me for about a couple hours when he first came to the area. And I told him if he did, a certain way of approach in business and development up here in Paradise, because he wanted to help again with rebuilding housing and, making it affordable. The developer he chose to work with, each home that they've built so far, and there have been 9, I think, total in the last year, each one of those homes they've built has been listed and sold within about a 2-month average. So if that tells you anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, in the absence of further questions, I think we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. We are very appreciative for those who attended and the questions you have and your ongoing commitment to the community. We look forward to seeing where this goes together and to bringing to bear perhaps more of the resources that members of the Counselors of Real Estate, both across the country and around the world, have, and to see the steps this takes in offering our assistance in the future through relationships with organizations like After the Fire. And also, we're here to continue to help. You can facilitate those further questions through Samantha DeCoven, and we are appreciative of your time.
Thank you all.